So back to our original thread around the VC fuel play, and then 2.5 years ago, retention marketing started to seem relevant because now your CACs are crazy and you're dealing with this relatively small tab, which all brands are chasing. Which means if you don't drive retention, you will ultimately cap out in terms of how you can grow, because you can keep acquiring customers, but without repeats, your active base continues to either remain stable or start to shrink. And now you have to prove to your VC that you have a potentially large market, which means you can't compromise growth. Puts you in a bit of a downward spiral. You continue burning till you crash.
It's a fairly vicious
And that's a real, I mean, given the fact that about 90% of series or seed funded brands will not even make it to series B, is a reality. So perhaps for a VC lens, that's how the nature of the business is. Some people will crack it and that's what they want to bet on. The rest of them go to hell.
See, I mean, that's hedging bets. That's a separate thing.
That's the nature of a VC's business. All I'm saying is the founder
but the fact is it's really bad for businesses.
It's really bad for the founders because they're operating in a framework that they'll be the 2% lucky ones, which 90% chances are they will not. So how do you build a sustainable
that's a very bad Pareto, right?
That's a reality of how that market plays out. I mean, it takes a certain degree of stupid optimism to believe that you will be in that 2% without planning for it in some sense.
It takes stupid optimism to be a founder.
Well, that I would still take it as a default requirement, but this can be solved.
So if
this part can be solved.
If you don't have that stupid optimism, then you most likely are not going to start up.
So I don't think, I mean, so there are two different pieces to me.
The fact that it's fantastic. I mean it in a good way. I don't mean it in a
So I like that positivity of a founder, that you're optimistic about the potential of what you want to do. But then, the phrase I hear and which I quite like is use your heart to decide where you want to go, but then use your head to decide how you're going to get there. So the moment you decide to be a founder, if you're going to be irrational about how you're going to play your game to get your business PMF scale, whatever sorted, is where the question mark comes in, and that's where the mortality becomes crazy if you're not mindful of these choices.
I've had the privilege of working with a lot of founders, and I'm just being very candid.
Sure.
I think there is no founder who starts up, one, without knowing to a very large extent where they're going.
Sure.
Second is they have a very clear sense of also what they want to build and how they want to build, more often than not.
Sure.
Yeah. They also have the gumption to get there.
Okay.
There are a bunch of things that happen along the way, and that's I think a bit of a risk challenge, and also has its upsides. Which is one, if you get capital infusion, then the capital starts to speak and you don't speak very quickly.
Which so is where it falls.
It starts to fall a little off. Yeah, it starts to fall off the
journey
plan
that you
plan that you had. And most well-laid plans I have seen fall very badly because of that.
Which is the part which gets tricky one for me, right? Because if you're a founder who are very clear on the logical, sensible thing to do, you wouldn't get tempted by shortcuts normally. But that's what second-half founders.
Sometimes what happens is it's not even a shortcut. Sometimes you are at a situation and it's not about defending the ecosystem that has been built.
Sure, that's an evolution journey.
And it's neither about supporting decisions in this case, because each decision has its own sort of pragmatic or emotional lens to it, as you mentioned. But I think most founders, when they start off, the fundamentals of business are in place. The fundamentals start to be bartered for some degree of capital infusion because of runway. Now it's a very catch-22.
Yeah.
There are some very smart founders, very strong founders. And again, more of them than less, and which is a good thing. And that is why I think this entire ecosystem in the enterprise.
It's evolving. The second-half founders tend to be looking at it like very differently.
Even the first time, because सियाने हो गए ना, सबने सीख लिया है. बहुत लोगों ने सीखा है, दूसरों की गलतियों से सीखा है बहुत लोगों ने, which is a good thing.
Which is a good thing, of course. That's how you evolve.
Which is fantastic. And I think, a lot of credit goes to, programs like Shark Tank and others, where there is clearly an immense amount of information exchange that is happening. So it's fantastic, right? I think the ecosystem needed that infusion of confidence and just exuberance that you can make it. But how I think the retention piece is still not a boardroom and still not a strong enough boardroom conversation is because the founder at this very moment is still fighting every day.
Sure.
Now, the team that the founder has potentially built, could be marketing, could be sales, whatever it is, that team itself has not gone through the rigor of retention. So they've gone through the rigor of media buying. If you're old school enough, you would have gone through some degree of media buying, right? Media buying आता है, offline आता है, event बनाना आता है, creatives बनाने आते हैं, ad बनाना आता है, celebrity handle करना आता है.
Facebook, Google भी आता है लगभग.
हाँ, वो तो media buying में आ गया ना, वो सब. हाँ, तो ठीक है, all that. I mean, whether it's biddable or it's whatever it is, वो सब आता है.
But that's
broadly वो सब
sorted
आता
and
है.
figured.
जो नहीं आता है, वो है लोगों के फोन में घुस के उनको इन्फ्लुएंस करना through the power of either a WhatsApp or an SMS or a web push or an email. Because that's craft. That is not just tool.
Sure.
It's the craft of being able to tell a compelling story. It's the craft of writing really well. It's the craft of designing things in a beautiful manner. It's the craft where you are not only pushing a discount, but you're adding some value to my life. Now, for a brand to go through that evolutionary cycle of thinking that my retention funnel is not just about pushing a discount or putting a free product and actually starting to add some value back to the consumer or the user's life, I think that evolutionary curve has still not happened here. Or happened, but in a very limited space. Second is there isn't enough talent either at, I mean, for me, I think the talent is mostly at the brand level and then it gets transferred onto as an insight to the service provider level.
Sure.
Which is how do I really make this into an actionable piece? Right? You know, old school, there used to be this thing about direct mailers going.
I know.
Okay.
It's still coming back, huh?
I mean,
turns out the best open rates are direct mails.
Of course. But, you know, suppose you were to take a Reader's Digest, or suppose you were to take any subscription, you would end up getting these small little delightful things. Most of it would not be about, hey, you can get another Reader's Digest free. Like, no one cares. Right? I mean, you've already paid for it. But there would be something that would keep people excited, happy, sort of in line with what the brand really wants them to think of or how they want them to feel.
Sure.
That conversation, unfortunately, doesn't remain on the table. Now the conversations about retention is, I sent an email, how many people did it get delivered to? What was the cohort size? What was the open rate? Click through, blah, blah, blah. And you suddenly like, dude, that's not even what you need to be solving for. You're solving for something different. You're solving for how many of these people, or sort of what kind of conversations are you being able to drive, and how many people are coming back, and what is the stickiness factor through and through, right? There is no stickiness factor measurement.
Okay.
Right. And it's not dashboard. You know, so what I mean by that is there are a bunch of metrics which should ladder up to one key metric, or maximum two key metrics. Bunch of them. I think the world of sentiment analysis has done this really well, or social listening has done this very well with sentiment analysis.
Okay.
Social listening is pure play listening.
Sure.
Listening, assessment, analysis, sort of decrypting it and then turning it into some degree of an insight. That's been done really well with the ideology of sentiment frameworks being deployed on top. So you're listening and there is a sentiment framework. Fantastic. I, as a C-suite, I know what I have to look for.
Fair enough.
My ability to buy or sell that particular service, whether it's internally or to myself, is very clear because I see one graph going up or something going down.
And then you do whatever it takes to make it work.
And I know where it needs to go. So as long as the sentiment piece for my organization, for my company is going up, my brand sentiment is going up, my negatives are low, my neutrals and positives are high, it's almost like an NPS, right?
Sure.
So broadly, you have some degree of measurability and metric to it. I think what right now happens with retention marketing is that you end up getting a dashboard which has lots of blinking lights. Lots of them. What chamakdar cheez hoti hai wo, theek hai? You look through left to right and you see there is one pie, there is one line graph, there is one pie chart, and you're like, okay, this is great. What the heck do I do with it?
What is the top level item?
Yeah, what's there? What's there, right? Now, either you know how to read it and extrapolate. Now, once you have extrapolated, but no, it's not that easy. You have extrapolated an insight. You've extrapolated something from it. Now you have a full stakeholder system that you have to convince to do something. Sometimes it's about orders not going on time, which has led to some degree of, complaints coming in or whatever it is. Sometimes it's about not enough content being there, which has led to a lot of inquiry coming in. So look at it this way, right? You can break down almost any funnel into an sort of inquiry, complaint, and request piece. Broadly that, right? So then you have an ECR model that sort of gets deployed on top of it. And on top of that, you have a recency, frequency, whatever else that you want to put. You have people who have come in, or you have people who are reacting to things, or they're asking questions, or they're engaging with you. 90% of this world, by the way, only complains, right?
The other ones don't speak.
Otherwise, don't care, right? And then on top of it, when people are opening an email, if it doesn't really add any value to them, they're never going to share anything. Second is, no one really takes a screenshot of an email and shares it unless it's absolutely, well, out there. Something has happened. WhatsApp was very, very good till about a few months back,
It
maybe.
became too crowded.
Man, it's become a cesspool right now.
It's the same as what happened to Facebook, right? I mean, no more friends, it's just brands.
It's just brands. It's just brands. So my WhatsApp is full of brands trying to sell me shit that I don't need. And I don't care. I'm blind to all of them.
What I would call the goose with the golden eggs, which is now about to die.
Yeah, exactly, right? I think people have milked it too much. So there was supposed to be some degree of restraint, but it's gone. So within all of this,
question Facebook should have solved, but anyway.
No, Facebook's not very good at solving any of this.
Clearly.
So let's leave that. Now, in the middle of all of this, you have this one dashboard with all those blinking lights. And everything starts to break. Because either I have extrapolated, and if I have extrapolated, then there is a downstream impact of what needs to be done. And I need different kinds of people within my organization to pull, extra hours or just put in more bandwidth to solve a bunch of problems which will help my retention funnel. But then those people don't give a shit about the retention funnel. So what do I really do?
One of the topics I was trying to write about or articulate a thought process on was, does the chief retention officer need a seat at the table? Because the exact same question mark, if there's a set of products which are giving me terrible NPS, do I want to continue shipping them or should I discard that inventory? And that conversation should be had with the guy who owns inventory /finance /whatever, because if you're going to dispatch those products, you're ultimately hurting your marketing.
All the best for the guy.
Yeah, but
if that product is giving them the highest gross margin and the maximum amount of revenue, then they're always going to be in a situation where sales to aa rahe tujhe kya farak padta. What percentage of the sale is actually that right? Thankfully, I've worked with orgs which
were able to solve for this. What was the stance?
Tremendously. I think one, again, extreme amounts of privilege. One, because I was very early stage to a lot of this, so I was able to set that discipline. Yeah. So the culture has always been that. See, one, because I grew up in a very service-oriented environment. So when you grow up with clients and your life runs on payments coming in on time, you sort of start to make sure that you're delivering value.
Fair enough.
There's really no other option, right?
It's the same as our people like us, because if we're not on our true servicing value, it's going to get messed.
The entire service industry runs on that, right? Because the entire service industry fundamentally runs on the back of ensuring that there is under promise, over delivery, and a certain amount of commitment towards empathy.
Sure.
3 broad sort of areas for us to focus on. Same applies when you're looking at a marketing funnel. You have to make sure that people are extremely comfortable, they're happy, and then if they are happy, they'll keep coming back to you. Which is the customer centricity and the customer delight aspect to any organization. And the brand sort of forms itself around that. Very lucky to have had the opportunity to influence that culture in organizations.
That's kind of where I was trying to find the dots between the whole optimism versus rational planning, because the founders that you seem to have worked with had that, let's say, sense and the judgment to say, okay, this is something that needs to be solved on an early level in terms of priority, design, system, empowerment, because like you said, the guy who needs to care about it, if he doesn't care about it, there's only very little you can do. So in the power equation structures as well, if it's not designed well, it's going to end up in a certain direction. And that's sort of known now, right? I mean, we've seen enough evidence of things falling apart because they were not designed well.
See, I came from a very old school thought process. And I worked with companies which were working across the length and breadth of India.
Sure.
So for me, and I've sort of, when you look at it, right? I mean, the businesses I've worked with, Dine Out, HCL, Akash Digital, Bombay Shaving Company, Akiva Superfoods, and Heads of Hotels, none of them have been companies which are not grounded in the reality of India. They've all been very close to the root. You're running shops, man. You have to be as close to the root as you can be, right? None of these are ultra high luxury brands. None of them.
Okay.
I
would have thought the last one to be,
other than Heads of Hotels, I knew where you were going with that.
No, that's okay.
But again, no, there are lots of entry level products, right? So, and honestly, it's not a luxury as much as it's about.
For an outsider, it might seem like. For pet parents, I've seen them to be fairly comfortable with it. So I think.
No, because you know the quality that you buy, right? And actually, that's also a very important part.
Sure.
When you know that you have a brand that is going to charge a certain amount of value premium, not a price premium, but a value premium, and the value premium is super important. and you know that people are ready to pay for it, and you're going to spend maybe an extra amount of money to acquire people, then it is supremely important to do all that you can to retain them.
Absolutely. So back to the same thread in terms of the founders having placed this whole sensibility in the business in the early times itself. And you were talking about these brands being very grounded in reality. And that's where, what happens to other brands which don't seem to be taken care of very well is the question mark. And to me, that's where it starts to fall apart. And it's the sole, the 98% people who don't make it. Now, if the founder were to apply this judgment from others' mistakes, which hopefully people are doing in their second time stints, as well as learning from the peers' mistakes, these things get better. Now stitching it back to this whole state of retention marketing situation, the fact that, and we very consistently believe, and we were also making these prophecies that these things have to change because there's no way this can be the order of life. The fact that you need to be mindful of retention on day 0/day T minus 90, in fact, when you're doing a business plan, is hopefully becoming more and more mainstream. And the part that needs to get solved slightly better, like you said, was this the talent supply of being able to think like this, being able to address topics? There's an art and science to it. You talked about the whole crafting the messaging, crafting the experience, crafting those pieces. And the other piece was, what I heard you say was around the empowerment of this role itself, right? Because if he doesn't have the power equation to pull the strings he need to pull, it'll constantly remain a struggle. If order deliveries are the reason why people aren't repeating, then, he needs to get us sorted.
Yeah, which is where the organization needs to start rallying behind this process.
So in some sense, retention is not just a marketer's problem, it's everyone's problem.
I think retention is a business problem, man.
Absolutely.
Right?
Which means the seat at the table would be fair justified.
I think the seat on the table is already there. It's just held by the marketer to some extent.
Yeah, but
having said that,
CMO who has an acquisition goal and who has this.
But having said that, exactly, I'm coming to that. But having said that, smart CEOs or CBOs are realizing the importance of it.
Sure.
Right? And I don't think I have met any business leader worth their salt who within the top 3 problems, retention is not one of them.
Very interesting because, on one side you have people who acknowledge and realize this is a problem. On the other side, you also look at the appetite in terms of the initiatives, not just from a money spend, but also from a mindshare spend on this whole subject. Because we deal with people all the time on that side and we supposedly sell retention as a solution. Now, of course, the technology is only part of the solution. There's a lot more that needs to happen to make the outcome appear. But just somewhere the mindset around investing in technology still seems to be more of an infrastructure. We need AWS. You need all of this physical infrastructure. The more you can optimize the cost, the better it is. But you don't, and on one side, you're like looking at an agency which is solving performance marketing for you from a lens where 6% of your spends are fair ask. But when it comes to retention marketing, I want to optimize
that's also changing. Just to let you know
I'm
that.
very curious to see how that plays
out. That's changing. So it's not so much on media spends anymore.
Right.
Now it's a percentage of revenue at a certain return.
Thank God. So for me,
so that's how to happen. That's happening across the board, and it's happening really well.
I'm glad because
and
it
those agencies have also taken on retention mandates.
The
agencies have also taken on retention mandates.
Okay, tell me more about this. What is happening there?
So very interestingly, now that I have the privilege of working with different kinds of people,
on all sizes, shapes,
and mostly a certain shape and a certain size.
Sure.
But the good thing is that a lot of agencies have become mature over a period of time, and they needed to be, right? I mean, it's survival of the most relevant, forget the fittest. The relevance came when they said that, okay, now you don't have a disparate funnel, you have one. You have one engine, and that engine needs to start doing both things. We'll help you acquire. We're going to help you acquire quality people.
Okay.
As opposed to saying we're just going to help you acquire. So that's a very lovely change that has happened. Right? So the quality, early stage, we used to have this thing about lead scoring, right? I mean, you essentially want to get people in through the best lead score because you know that their ability to stay through that commerce, through that sort of commitment to commerce will remain. Here, a lot of agencies are like, I'm going to acquire quality people for you. I'm going to put them through a nice nurturing methodology. And I'm going to help you retain them over a period of time. You are going to pay me a percentage.
Right? It puts brakes in the pace of growth because quality can't be.
But again, now it's not growth at all costs.
Absolutely.
Which is very good.
Growth is your key metric.
Which goes back to what I said in the beginning.
This is the Marwadi way of building a business.
This is the right way of building a business. Business growth at all costs is not business growth. It's like steroid-driven.
One vanity metric, perhaps.
Yeah, it's absolute vanity. right? And more, actually, it's not even vanity. Let's not even call it vanity. Because after a while, that vanity, when everyone is doing 20 crores a month, there is no vanity anymore.
Yeah.
True. Because everyone has that kind of capital access, right?
So you're saying the agencies are now getting, let's say, wiser / more evolved /
So
more
not just the agency, I think it's also a mandate to the marketing team.
Right.
It's a mandate to CMOs. It's a mandate to CBOs, where people either who hold businesses or people who hold capital, depends on how you sort of have bifurcated your system. They are starting to look at core metrics of, if you're acquiring people, are you acquiring the right set of people? The right set of people also is an indication of what kind of brand equity strength you have in the market.
Let's just double click on this.
Yeah.
I'm a new brand CMO, consumer brand play at a certain scale, certain, product portfolio, certain level of maturity, acceptance in the market. Some PMFs here and there established, perhaps lifetime value still is probably solved. Now I need to deal with this whole decision making on designing my organization, perhaps doing some stuff in-house, perhaps giving to an agency. How do I decide whether they're the right, let's say, approach to take, people to do business with, what KPIs to solve for? Because that's a critical juncture at which either I can go the right path and, do a good job, eventually scale up a sensible business, or this can just be a battle that I'll keep fighting without much success. So what are the things that you've seen happen which are the
So a lot of people have burned their fingers.
Absolutely.
There is no right answer to this. I'm sorry, but
there's a bunch of boxes to you.
But I'll tell you broadly what a good framework is.
Right.
If that helps.
Yeah, that does help.
And also, by the way, cards on the table, I'm not a big fan of the agency model. I'm personally not a big fan of the agency model, because I think at the end of the day, you need to build core capacity in-house. Right?
Yeah, I mean,
but when you can't build it, then you rely
there's a life stage.
Yeah.
Whatever.
So you rely on external support, and I'm not taking away from the agency. It's just that at some stage you need to just build that capacity in-house.
Well,
right?
Fair enough.
But if you have to choose an agency partner, then I think there are two questions that you should ask yourself. One, am I okay to let go of control? And it's not so much about choosing the right partner; it's about letting the partner do the job that they have to do. So a lot of times, what I have seen or potentially experienced also in some form is that you are so not ready to let go of control that after a while the agency doesn't become someone who is consulting you. They become someone who's just doing it for you. So you become an execution partner. You don't really become a consultative partner, and that's where you sort of lose out on what potentially the agency can bring as value to the table. So that's one.
My contention also happens when it comes to agencies. Typically, when it comes to the sales pitch, the guy who's selling versus the guy who's actually delivering on the account tends to be very different.
Correct.
So the whole quality of execution versus consulting, and that's where the question of what to demand from your agency becomes. What metrics do you demand? So you said ROAS, margin.
So all of that is, I think that's, people are smart enough. People know that they have to.
I've seen, unfortunately, I mean, of course, it could be a function of what kind of people you've met and what kind of people I've met and what kind of radar you might have. But I don't think it's yet mainstream. And that's why I'm trying to make sure that, if you,
I think if I have to look at an agency, one, I will look at the size of the agency depending on my size. I don't want to be a very small player in a large agency. A lot of people would love to go to a large agency because they feel that there's so much that they can bring to the table. But if you're a very small account, then 90% of the time you're not going to get really well serviced. So that's one. So I will go for
a fair thing to say that I need a partner level attention to my account personally and a certain cadence. That,
okay, the partner level भी नहीं हो, but at least someone senior enough in that system.
Once a month अगर मुझे नहीं मिल रहा तो it's not.
So broadly that. मतलब चलो partner हो, owner हो, जो भी है, but you need someone who's got to have some degree of care and love for you, and the care and love does not come when that person is doing 30 brands at the same time.
Yes, absolutely.
Right? Or you are one of the lowest sort of revenue driven.
So if you're small, find somebody your size equivalent.
Slightly bigger. Just slightly bigger. Right? So that's number one. Second is that what are you really good at and what are they really good at? Now, as a founder, you might be fantastic, and I've seen this. Okay, founders are very good at a few things. Very good at a few things. So you will have a set of founders who are going to be fantastic at, identity, branding, just the comms of it. They know intuitively how the brand should feel, look, because they built it.
Yeah.
Right? They have sat with the first early stage designers and literally potentially written down every word and said, "Mera to dil ka tukda ye hai."
Correct.
Right? This is how it should be. You want to hold on to that. So now you don't want a partner who's going to come in and say, "I want to change this shit." You want a partner who's going to say, "I love what you have done. And I see a lot of potential in this and I want to build it up with you."
Sure.
Right? So you want a consultative approach and you don't want a disruptive approach at that.
Yeah.
Right? And you don't want them to come in and start, sort of poking into your branding. You want them to say...
But that's assuming the founder is pretty good with it, because there are
So I'm saying you have to figure out what you're really good at.
You have to decide that, because, I mean, there's also this whole counter reality, right? People are probably great with products, but they're not necessarily great with comms, which means they hold on to the wrong stuff, then there's this shit getting amplified.
Depends. But you have to figure out what you're really good at.
Sure.
At the end of the day, as a founder, if you don't have a very strong bias and an opinion, then anyways, you're not really building out a company that really is going to stand the test of time. And I would much rather err on the side of a founder being proven wrong over a period than the founder assuming they're wrong from day one.
Fair enough.
Yeah. So when you're working with an agency, figure out what are you really good at, because you want to hold on to that, and then be very open to letting everything else be with them.
Sure.
Second is, when you're finding an agency, you're not finding an agency, you're finding someone who is going to stand next to you even on a Sunday if something is really going wrong. And there is a very large potential of that happening, right?
Sure.
कुछ ना कुछ कहीं ना कहीं पे हमेशा फटता है. So you need someone who's going to stand right next to you.
Fair.
And I think that is not so much about the core capacity, but the intent of the agency.
Correct.
So I would hyper index on intent. Second indexing will be on core capacity and capability. Third would be on the current team, because the team will keep changing.
Sure.
Right. So I don't really worry about, oh my God, like, did I find the right kind of vibe from that one guy?
Sure.
Or, oh, I loved that one art guy who was sitting there, so I want him. Bro, no,
I mean,
वो तो कल चला जाएगा ना, उसको कोई फर्क नहीं पड़ता. Does the management have the intent of being next to you? Does the management have the core capacity and capability to support you when you need that support? Third is, do they have some degree of a domain knowledge so that they can use that as a transference? Fourth is, are they people you can comfortably keep on board even if you have a bad month?
From a financial lens?
Yeah.
So, you spoke about the agency ecosystem, and there are multiple things. The founder might hold on to the brand and identity. He might take the performance marketing bit offloaded, hit a certain whatever media spend calculation or revenue calculation. And then there's this whole lens on first party engagement, retention, whatever we do in our space. So again, the service providers in that space, one might or might not be available, might not be as efficient or well trained or qualified. So how do you look at this whole lens on solving for retention in an early day capability building? At what stage do you, let's say, choose to definitely do it in-house? Do you want to do it in-house from day zero? Do you believe that, okay, in the initial days you can let the agency be, but then what kind of KPIs do you put on the agency to make sure that they're, accountable to those KPIs?
I think we're very early stage, then, retention is an organizational metric. It's not really just an agency metric.
Sure.
If you're very early stage, you're potentially looking at about 400-500, orders in a month, maybe even less sometimes.
Sure.
Your scale is very limited.
So as a founder, you might want some metrics, and that should be a
I think as a founder, you are obsessed about retention.
Sure.
So if you have a habit forming product and then you're not selling in any other channel, and you don't see potentially, 70-80% of people coming back the next month and buying it, then there's something wrong with your product, man.
Or the downstream process of repeat insurance, right? Because I might really like that serum, but only if I use it for 25 times, I will know that this is actually effective.
हाँ तो वही मैं एक महीना मान के चल रहा हूँ कि चलो ठीक है, एक महीना 1.5 महीने में, whatever the time span of when people should come back and reorder.
Right.
If you're seeing that people are not coming back and doing it, then there is something fundamentally wrong either with the product or the pricing, or there is another competitor who has got something better, whatever it is.
Something or the other.
Then you have to get your hands dirty.
Correct.
And listen, retention is about getting your hands dirty, man. I mean, like, can we talk about that? Can we talk about how, if you're not calling people, if you're not really asking your customer what happened, why the heck did you bugger off, you're never going to be able to figure out. No amount of digital enterprise being thrown on top of this will ever replace the human intervention that will give you the right kind of insight as to why people are leaving.
And in the 0 to 1 stage, that's the most critical way of
not
driving
insights.
0 to 1,
that's across.
Oh, so
even at very large scale, very, very large scale, and this is something that we have institutionalized multiple times. If I see too many drop-offs happening across a particular cohort, which was well nurtured, and people who are coming to me regularly and they've stopped coming to me for a while, then pick up the phone and call them. Even if it means that it's 100 calls going out in a day, call them. Of the 100, probably 5 will speak to you.
Something would be worthwhile.
But figure out why those people are not coming back, and they're not going to reply to your emails. They're not going to click on your WhatsApps. They're not going to look at your SMSs. They are going to unsubscribe. They will drop off your list of people who are marketable.
Right.
They will put you as borderline spam. All that is going to happen. But what you have not got is the reason. What you've got is a cleaner data set. Because suddenly people have left. So now your delivery rates have become suddenly better because guess what? Those people are dropped off.
Yeah,
वो तो हट गया, वो तो आपके system ने ही हटा दिया उनको. So essentially, I have cleansed out
the non-responses.
The non-responses, and I've said, okay, now my system's just got better. So it's essentially, think of it like this pack, right? I mean, the slowest deer gets hunted first. Right. So your pack starts to keep getting
faster.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in terms of institutionalizing this whole thing, you said you've done this multiple times, and bit top down at the org level, the founder has to show that obsession that this needs to be done as a practice. And then who does it? Because if it's a lower end of the hierarchy, he probably has no idea how to interpret some of those things.
I think it just literally is about someone holding the mantle, man.
Somebody who's at the right level to be able to make the judgment, to be able to make the decisions, to influence elements across the company that need to be solved.
Yes. I mean, the straight answer is yes.
In some sense, it's still pretty top down, right?